Let's look behind the stained glass and the peaceful haloed light. Let's look beneath the ethereal robes of white linen and follow the voice that spoke from the clouds to the mortal that it embodied. See, let's start there, with his hands. They weren't the delicate, supplicant hands of Renaissance paintings. They were the hands of a tecton, a craftsman, an artisan, a builder, a carpenter, hands that knew the heft of a hammer and the stubborn grain of olive wood. They were calloused, probably scarred. They knew the language of splinters, of measuring twice and cutting once, of turning a raw, unforgiving piece of nature into something useful, something with purpose, a door, a yoke, a table. This is not a metaphor. It is the physical reality of a life grounded not in scripture but in sawdust and sweat. And the voice. Strip away the King James cadence. Hear it as it was, Aramaic, a Semitic tongue, guttural and earthy, the language of the marketplace, of arguments over the price of fish, of lullabies sung to a child. His Greek was likely functional, the utilitarian language of commerce and occupation. His Hebrew, perhaps more formal, the language of the scrolls. But his truth, his core message, would have been spoken in the dialect of his neighbors. It was a voice that had to carry over the bleating of sheep and the chatter of a crowd, a voice that knew how to pitch itself to be heard by the woman on the edge of the gathering as much as the man at his feet. This man, born into a world pinned under the thumb of Roman legionaries, understood systems from the bottom up. He wasn't an academic in a library. His university was the village well, the tax collector's booth, the fishing boat rocking on the waves. He saw the intricate, often cruel machinery of power. He saw the purity codes that created a social ladder with the ritually clean at the top and the sick, the poor, the foreign, the sinful crushed at the bottom. He saw the collaboration, the exploitation, the quiet desperation etched on the faces of people who toiled for a sliver of what they produced. And he responded not with a treatise or a political manifesto, but with a story. His genius was this. He understood that you don't change a mind by force, you change it by planting a seed. His parables weren't quaint fables for children. They were thought grenades lobbed into the center of a complacent society. A story about a foreigner, a despised Samaritan, being the hero? In a world built on ethnic and religious animosity, that wasn't just a nice tale. It was a profound and dangerous act of social subversion. A story about a father who celebrates the return of his reckless, wasteful son, shaming the dutiful one. That wasn't just about forgiveness. It was a direct assault on the rigid honor and shame culture that governed every aspect of their lives. He didn't give answers. He offered questions wrapped in the familiar imagery of mustard seeds and lost coins, forcing the listener to find the answer within themselves. He spoke with an authority that unnerved people, not the borrowed authority of quoting ancient law, but the intrinsic authority of someone who sees the world with excruciating clarity. Then he went further. He didn't just talk about a new way of being, he embodied it. His most radical act was perhaps the simplest. He ate with people. In his time and place, sharing a meal was a profound statement of acceptance and kinship. It was a binding contract of community. So when he sat down and broke bread with a tax collector, a traitor collaborating with the Roman occupiers, it was a political earthquake. When he allowed a woman of ill repute to touch him, he wasn't just being kind. He was dynamiting the very foundations of the purity system that kept everyone in their place. He didn't just welcome the outcast, he centered them. He built his movement not from the top down, with the powerful and influential, but from the margins in, with the fishermen, the disenfranchised, the forgotten. This was his politics of compassion. A politics that declares that a person's worth is not determined by their wealth, their piety, their health, or their social standing, but by their inherent humanity. In a brutal empire that valued power, citizenship, and strength above all, this idea was more than revolutionary. It was an existential threat. Compassion, when practiced with such radical consistency, is not gentle or safe. It is a fire. It exposes the hollowness of systems built on exclusion and greed. It asks uncomfortable questions of those who benefit from the status quo. Why is he healing on the Sabbath? He's asking, is tradition more important than a person's suffering? Why is he talking to that woman? He's asking, is a man-made rule more important than a woman's dignity? Why did he storm into the temple and overturn the tables of the money changers? He was screaming, without words, that a system of worship had become a system of exploitation, a perversion of its purpose. In the end, it wasn't his claims of divinity that got him killed. It was his humanity. The Roman and religious authorities saw a man who was building a parallel kingdom, not a kingdom of territory and armies, but an invisible kingdom built on an entirely different set of values, an architecture of empathy. And they understood, correctly, that you cannot have two kings. An empire built on dominance cannot tolerate a prophet of radical inclusion. You can't serve both power and people. So they did what empires always do to threats they cannot control or co-opt. They crushed him. They made an example of him, using their most brutal tool of public terror, the cross. But the story, of course, doesn't end there. The echo of that life, that brief, incandescent flare of a man who lived 2 millennia ago, persists. It persists not in the dogma or the institutions built in his name, but in the unsettling questions his life poses to us, right now, in our own complicated world. What does it mean to build a table where everyone has a seat? Who are the outcasts we refuse to see? What are the purity codes of our time, the ones based on wealth, politics, nationality, or identity, that we use to justify our hierarchies? When does our comfort depend on someone else's oppression? The true legacy of the carpenter from Nazareth is not a religion to be joined, but a challenge to be lived. A challenge to see the world not as it is, but as it could be. A challenge to believe that a different way of being is possible, and to have the courage to build it, one compassionate, subversive, and profoundly human act at a time. The foundation isn't a sermon, it's a question, and it's yours to answer.